Welcome back to another episode of Boom or Bust, your home for NFL Draft Talk. I'm your host, Terry, and today doing a coaching one-on-one series. Talk about it with my Bears content. I also talk about it with the draft content and everything else. I just want better fans, man. We got to be more educated about the game of football and how it works, and that's all it's about, man. That's what I'm looking to do. That's what I hope to do because when I engage, it's no fun engaging in conversation with people that don't really know the game, and so it's nice to always elevate the conversation. And so there you go. So today we're talking about confidence. If you've listened to my draft content, some of my other content as well, my editorials, but if you listen to my draft content especially, you'll know that one of the things that I always say, this is true of the draft going into the NFL, the best thing you could take from me is that 99% of the NFL is scheme dependent and that there's very few players that transcend scheme. And so there's a lot of times people will look at stats, they'll look at a game, whatever you know looking at, and say, "Oh my God, that player is just so amazing. There's no way he can be bad." And then you wonder why people pay so much money in free agency and they have bust, or you wonder why people go crazy in college and then they don't end up well in the NFL. And so again, I try to tell people most of the players you see are scheme dependent. They're good at what they're asked to do. And then when you're asked to do things that you're not good at, you don't do well. And so that's the biggest takeaway you could take from me. So in the same idea of that, let's back it up to confidence. So as a coach, when we're talking about coaching players, we're talking about getting them ready, preparing them to do what they have to do. It changes as you go up the levels, but it's the same concept. Players are going to perform better when they're confident in what they're doing. And so there's levels to the confidence. At the highest level, we're talking about confident in the ability of the coach. And so we talk about how important it is, for a head coach to manage the ship, to be able to relate, to be able to inspire, motivate, all that good stuff. But at the very first level is the ability and the confidence of a player, or I should say the confidence of a player in their own ability and how confident they are in that they can perform what you're asking them to do. Because the players know themselves. For the most part, they know themselves the best. And so it can't, well, that's not exactly true, but players think they know themselves the best, whether that's true or not. And so they have an idea of what they can and can't do, what things they're not good at. And I'm not talking about broad strokes. I'm talking about very small things, from a quarterback doing a 3-step versus a 5-step, from a defensive back doing a speed turn versus a shadow technique, from or a bell technique, really, but from a linebacker playing a run versus playing a pass. There's so many small things that players really look at. Now, it gets better as you go to the top, to the NFL. And high school, which is my forte, is very, very, very prominent because a lot of these players aren't, NFL players. And so to get the best out of a player, you have to be able to make them confident. And I'm not talking about motivate them. I'm not talking about coddling them. I'm not about that. I'm talking about you have to be able to get them to understand what they're doing and what they need to do and why they need to do it in the bigger scheme of things, and show them how to do it. And to the point that they're confident that when they go out onto the field, they can, and you call that play or whatever it is, they're able to do what they can, what they're asked to do. And in the bigger scheme, it's the same thing when it's preparation. And that's translatable from high school through NFL as well, where you're talking about preparing a team to what you're going to see. And so you see some teams panic when they see a wrinkle or they see something they weren't looking at on film, and they never practice what to go over it. And it's like anything else. I mean, especially if you play sports, you understand. But it's like anything else. It's one thing to guess about what you're going to see, to watch something and be like, okay, I'm going to see that exact thing. It's another thing to watch what you're going to see, then go to practice, and either that week or every week or, the whole season, have a coach that says, hey, okay, what if they do this? What if they do that? Well, what if they do that? How will we react? And that helps coaches and that helps players be adjusted to what they might see. And so when they get into an unfamiliar situation in the game, they don't panic. And so there goes back to the oldest thing. It make practice hard so the game is easy. And so when we're talking about confidence, it affects everything. And it's a big conversation, but kind of like I was talking about, when you have players that are confident in what they're doing and they believe in it, then they can go out, not only execute from a psychological standpoint, but they can also execute faster. And so there's a lot of second guessing, especially when it comes to quarterback play, that can happen in football. And so that half a second or that second or whatever can be the difference. And I talk about that a lot. People here and there just like, that's cliche. No, that's what it is. That half a second could be the difference between the ball getting out and getting your arm hit by the defensive lineman. That half a second can be the difference between you getting a step in the pocket and getting sacked. That half a second decision could be the difference between you being underneath the receiver's hip when the ball goes up or you being behind him by a step. And those all matter. Every inch, every second of that matters. And so when you have players that can really execute with confidence in what they're doing, then you're talking about a team that's able to play fast and to make decisions quickly and to be as effective as possible. Now, you can be confident and not have the right scheme and all that. That's definitely there. But I would venture to say most NFL coaches and staffs, they have the right schemes and ideas. It's now about, can you teach it to a point where they are confident in executing and know what to do in multiple situations. And so for me, I talk a lot about high school and teaching. I'm in education now as far as my field. But at the time, before I was a business major when I started coaching. And I never thought about education. I never even thought about when I was playing, like, oh, most of these coaches are teachers. I was just like, whatever. But as I became a more and more veteran coach, people would talk about teaching. I'm just like, I'm not a teacher. But they're like, you are. As a coach, you are a teacher. Especially in high school, where, again, the talent level isn't high. So there's always going to be the balance between talent and technique. And, and that goes to skill. That also goes to mental preparation. And so when you're in high school, the talent is very low. And so the technique has to be very high. And you have to be able to teach. Some coaches have told you, there's quotes out there that high school football, or even lower than that, is way harder than NFL. And they say that because you have to be able to teach. Not only you're talking about players that aren't as talented, but you're also talking about players that aren't as educated. They don't think as well. And so in the NFL, you got players that don't process information and don't think in terms of football. But for the most part, you have educated players, with another reason why I love the 3-year rule. But you have educated players who can critically think. And so an adult being taught a concept, especially a 28-year-old veteran star who has a family that depends on and understands this is a job, that's very different than a 14-year-old with super fast 40 time but wants to be a kid. And so you have to be able to teach. And so again, back to the point, being able to teach what you want done by that player to a point that they're confident. And confidence doesn't mean I'm just cocky, I'm going to say it on Twitter and just talk. Confidence is you going out onto the field, seeing a formation, somebody line up, and not panicking and knowing exactly what you have to do. Now, you might not have trust. That's a very different conversation. If I come out as a corner, and I always think about cornerbacks because they're out on the island. But if I'm a cornerback and I have very high confidence in the scheme, I know what I'm taught. And no matter what the formation, okay, if they're in trips, I know this. If they're in double stack, I know this. If it's one receiver, I know this. And I know where my zone is in this cover 3. Now, if I do exactly perfect what I'm supposed to do, Prince Amukamara, and my free safety, Eddie Jackson, doesn't do his job and it's a big play, it hurts. And I might not have trust in my other player, in my teammate, but I know I'm confident that if we did what we're supposed to do, it would work. And so I think about some of the times, and I talk about this a little bit with the Bears. I think about times in my coaching career where I really, like, one of the worst coaching situations I had a team where, like, these players, and I was the defensive coach, but I was helping out on offense. And on offense, there was literally one play that we did in practice and scrimmages that worked. Everything else, because our quarterback situation was crazy, we had a lot of players going both ways. It was just a bad situation. And so the offense just wanted to run the same play. And I get it. You talking about Green Bay Packers, Lombardi right, Lombardi left with the sweep. And so, but that's old school. Like, they just want to run the same play because that's what they seen works. And so we have this whole offense, this whole playbook. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not working out on different times. But they just said, hey, this play has worked. That's the only play we've seen work. And so we would call these plays and understanding. And maybe I'll talk about this in a different time. But understanding practice is for practice. It's not the game plan. It's not the game. There's some players, especially young players, that don't understand winning practice is not everything. Yes, practice should be hard. Yes, practice should get you ready. But the goal is to win the game. Winning practice is not everything. And I always talk about that when you're talking about the first team defense versus the third string offense. And they're going crazy when they make a play. It's like, look, that's not the goal. You shouldn't be super satisfied with that. But anyway, so you get these players, they're just like, dude, none of this is working. And it's like, we have to get it on film. We have to have you go through the motions. We have to have you plus other people go through the motions so we can see who's good at actually doing what we're asked them to do. What does this work against this scheme where there's 3-4 with a cover 4, where there's 4-3 with a cover 3, whatever. We need to see how it works against different schemes, and we need to get it right. And if we can't get it right, we need to move to something else. But they don't want that. They just want to win. They want to feel good. They want to feel confident. And so guess what happens when you go into a game? They're just like, if it's a play, they're like, okay, we call this play. And they're just like, oh my God, this is the same play we got blown up in practice 18 times. And so they have no confidence. And so whether consciously or subconsciously, are they doing their best on the O-line with the blocks? Are they doing their best on the with the receiving end? Are the players doing their best when they're not confident? And the answer is no. And so you can look at Seattle Seahawks. They ran a cover 3 shell. Very simple defense. A lot of it was simple. But guess what? They executed well. And I'll talk about execution in a different time. But they executed well because they were confident. They knew that it didn't matter if they had all of this and that. They knew that I knew my job. And I know his job, and everybody's working together. And they ran that scheme. And they did well with it because everyone was confident in what they was asked to do. And so there's a lot of examples I could pull out. I won't spend a lot of time on it. But it's not just executing, it's also players in general. As I mentioned earlier, people fall in love with players and then they get picked up in free agency. It's like, what happened to them? They got paid so much money. Why aren't they doing this? And it's like you're asked to do different things. Or when a coach change happens and then they try to blame the coach, like, and I get that's part of it, but they're just like, oh, this player is no longer elite. And it's just like maybe the scheme is different. Maybe the coach is asking them to do different things. When you're a certain type of corner where zone works better for you, where you're off 5 yards, you can get safety help, but you can run up and play the ball aggressively, versus where we want you to follow this receiver, be on the island, and man, that's a very different skill set. And so whether we're talking about the draft, whether we're talking about an NFL team or a high school team, it doesn't matter. Confidence plays a huge piece. And so you see players that kind of fall in love, especially quarterbacks or whoever. They fall in love with that one thing that got them success early on because they're not confident. Or you see players hesitating, getting beat, and it just never clicks. They're not confident. You see players getting sacked or, don't have a good pocket. They're not confident. And so confidence plays a huge part when we're talking about just the fundamental level of football, without schemes, without talent, without positions, just at its fundamental core, being able to make a player feel confident is one of the biggest things that happens for football. So there's a lot to that conversation. A lot could be said, but I'll leave it to you. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about that. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.